The alien ship looked like it was dying. Its crystal hull had cracks running through it like broken glass. Sparks flew from damaged parts as it slowly moved toward Luna Station. The ship that had once been beautiful now looked like it had been. Through Helldot, inside the human space station, alarms were going off. Security teams ran to their positions. Nobody knew what to expect from the strange visitors. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the main control room, watching the damaged ship through the big window. He was a tough man with gray hair and scars on his face from old battles. He had fought in the Martian Rebellion and seen things that would scare most people. But this was different. This was first contact with a race that humans had never met before. "Sir, they're asking permission to dock," said Lieutenant Brown, looking at his computer screen. "They say they come in peace." Morrison nodded. "Let them dock, but keep all weapons ready." The alien ship connected to the station with a soft bump. The airlock opened with a hiss. Then they walked through. The aliens were tall and thin, with skin that seemed to glow with a soft blue light. Their eyes were large and sad. The leader stepped forward. She moved like she was very tired. "I am Ambassador Kalara of the Zephyrian Empire," she said in perfect English. Her voice was soft, but full of pain. "We need your help." Morrison studied her face. The glow in her skin was dim, like a dying light bulb. Her clothes were torn and dirty. This was not what he expected from an advanced alien race. "Follow me," Morrison said. "The council is waiting." They walked through the long hallways of Luna Station. Human workers stopped what they were doing to stare at the aliens. Some looked scared. Others looked curious. The aliens kept their heads down and said nothing. The council chamber was a big room with a round table in the middle. 12 of Earth's most important leaders sat around it. Captain Lisa Hayes was there too. She had just come back from a long patrol mission near Titan. She looked at the aliens with sharp eyes. Ambassador Kalara stood in the center of the room. Her hands were shaking. Morrison had never seen anyone look so desperate. "Your species is young," Kalara began. "We have watched you from far away. You fight each other often. You make war over small things. But we have heard stories about you. Stories that made us think you might be different when it really matters." She paused and looked around the room. Every human was listening carefully. "There is an enemy in the galaxy. We call them the Void Hunters. They eat planets. They turn whole solar systems into food for their ships. They have been growing stronger for 1,000 years. Morrison leaned forward. "How many planets have they taken?" 17 star systems, Kalara said. Her voice broke a little. "Billions of people are gone. Our fleets tried to stop them. We had the best ships, the best weapons, the best soldiers. It was not enough. They are too strong." Captain Hayes spoke up. "Why come to us? We're just humans. Our technology is nothing compared to yours." Kalara looked at her with those big, sad eyes. "Because you fight different than everyone else. Other races fight to win quickly and lose few soldiers. But humans fight like their lives depend on it. You do crazy things that nobody expects. You never give up, even when you should." The room was quiet for a long moment. Morrison looked around at the other council members. He could see what they were thinking. Earth had its own problems. Why should they get involved in an alien war? "Show us," Morrison said finally. "Show us what we're dealing with." Kalara touched a small device on her wrist. The lights in the room dimmed. Then pictures appeared in the air, above the table dot. The pictures showed worlds on fire. Ships as big as cities floating in space, their hulls black as night. Planets that had been stripped bare, with nothing left but rock and dust. The Void Hunters looked like nightmares made real. "They don't just kill," Kalara explained. "They feed on the energy. of living things. When they attack a planet, they suck out all the life force. The people don't just die. They are eaten alive by the darkness. One of the council members, General Parker, stood up. What makes you think we can help? If your advanced civilization couldn't stop them, what chance do we have? Kalara turned to look at him. For the first time since she arrived, her skin glowed a little brighter. Because you are the only race in the galaxy that fights like you have nothing to lose. The Void. Hunters have fought hundreds of different species. They always win because they can predict what their enemies will do. But humans are unpredictable. You do things that make no sense. Sometimes that's exactly what you need to win. Morrison stood up slowly. He walked to the window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, entire worlds were dying. People were being eaten by monsters from the dark. He turned back to face the alien ambassador. If we help you, what can you give us in return? Everything, Kalara said without hesitation. Our technology, our knowledge, our friendship. We will share all of it with you, but only if we survive. The council members looked at each other. This was the biggest decision in human history. They could stay safe on Earth and let the aliens fight their own war. Or they could risk everything to help strangers from another world. Morrison made up his mind. We'll take a vote. All in favor of helping the Zephyrians? One by one, hands went up around the table. It was not close. It was unanimous. Kalara fell to her knees. Her skin glowed brighter as tears ran down her face. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for giving us hope. Morrison helped her stand. Up, don't thank us yet, he said. We haven't won anything. But I promise you this. If humans are going to fight, we're going to fight like the galaxy has never seen before. As the meeting ended, Morrison looked out at the stars again. Soon, those stars would see something new. They would see what happened. When humans went to war, not for land or resources or pride, but for the simple right to exist, the Void Hunters were about to learn why humans were called the Crazy Ones. The message went out across all of human space at the same time. Every radio station, every computer network, every communication system carried the same words. The galaxy is in danger. Earth needs its heroes. All legends report for duty. Response was faster than anyone expected. On Europa, an old man was fixing his small fighter ship in a cold garage. Danny Collins had been called Reaper during the war, but now he was just a retired pilot who liked to tinker with engines. His hair was white, his hands were wrinkled, but his eyes were still sharp. When the message came through his old radio, Danny stopped working. He listened to every word twice. Then he smiled for the first time in years. Well, I'll be damned, he said to himself. Looks like the galaxy needs the Reaper one more time. He spent the next 6 hours getting his ship ready. The fighter was old but well maintained. Danny had modified it over the years, adding weapons and armor that weren't in any manual. By the time he was done, the ship looked like a flying weapon. Danny climbed into the cockpit and started the engines. They roared to life with a sound like thunder. He opened a communication channel to Earth Command. This is Danny Collins requesting permission to join the fleet, he said. Collins? Came the surprised voice from Earth Command. The Reaper Collins? We thought you were dead. Death's going to have to wait a little longer, Danny said. I've got work to do. Meanwhile, in the asteroid belt, another legend was waking up. Commander Amy Patterson had been living on a mining station for the past 5 years. She had tried to forget about her past, about the things she had seen in the dark between them. Stars.Amy was known as Ghost because her ship could disappear, not just from radar or sensors, but from reality itself. She had discovered the technology by accident during a mission that went wrong. The ship existed in a space between dimensions, invisible to normal space, When she heard the call for help, Amy knew she couldn't ignore it. She went to the old hangar where her ship was hidden. The Phantom sat there like a sleeping monster, its hull shifting between visible and invisible. "Hello, old friend," Amy whispered as she touched the ship's hull. "Ready to scare some bad guys?" The ship seemed to respond to her voice. Its engines hummed quietly, and the hull became solid again. From the outer colonies came more legends. General Pete Carter had been defending a supply route for 2 years during the colony wars. His enemies called him Iron Wall because nothing could get past his defenses. His ship, the Bulwark, was more like a flying fortress than a normal vessel. Pete got the message while he was eating breakfast with his wife. She looked at him and nodded before he could even ask. "Go," she said. "The galaxy needs you more than I do right now." Pete kissed her goodbye and walked to his ship. The Bulwark was huge and covered in armor plating. It had enough weapons to fight a small war and enough supplies to last for months. As Pete climbed aboard, his old crew started arriving. They had heard the call to Admiral Susan Lewis was in a meeting when the message came through. She was known as Stormbringer because her battle tactics were like lightning, fast, powerful, and impossible to predict. Her flagship, the Tempest, was the most advanced ship in the human fleet. Susan ended her meeting immediately and headed for her ship. Within an hour, the 7th Battle Group was moving toward Earth. 15 ships followed the Tempest, their crews ready for whatever was coming. But the most surprising response came from the research stations. Dr. Alan Murphy was working on a project so secret that even he wasn't sure it would work. His ship, the Curiosity, was filled with experimental weapons and technology that pushed the limits of what was possible. Alan was called Prophet because he always seemed to know what was coming next. When he heard about the alien threat, he wasn't surprised. He had been preparing for something like this for years. "Finally," he said to his team, "time to see if our impossible theories actually work." The biggest surprise came 3 days later. A ship appeared at the edge of the solar system, a ship that was supposed to be lost forever. The dreadnought Eternity had disappeared during the Void War 20 years ago. Everyone thought it was destroyed, but Captain Helen Rodriguez brought her ship home. The Eternity looked like it had been through hell. Its hull was scarred and patched, its weapons were strange and frightening, and its crew had eyes that had seen too much. Helen was known as Eternal because she never gave up, no matter how hopeless things looked. She had taken her ship into the dark spaces between stars and fought things that shouldn't exist. "Earth Command, this is Captain Rodriguez," she said over the radio. "The Eternity is reporting for duty." "Rodriguez? But you're supposed to be dead," came the shocked reply. "Death is just another enemy to fight," Helen said. "And I'm not done fighting yet." As the legendary ships arrived at Luna Station, the regular fleet officers watched in amazement. These weren't normal military vessels. They were unique creations, built and modified by people who had fought impossible battles and won. Danny Collins' fighter looked like a flying razor blade. Amy Patterson's ship kept disappearing and reappearing, making the dock workers nervous. Pete Carter's fortress took up 3 docking bays by itself. Susan Lewis' battle group arrived in perfect formation, their weapons gleaming in the starlight. But more than just the famous captains were coming. The message had reached every corner of human space, and ordinary people were answering the call. Merchant captains retrofitted their cargo ships with weapons. Mining crews attached drill lasers to their equipment. Even luxury yacht owners were bolting guns to their ships and heading for Earth. Within a week, Luna Station was surrounded by the strangest fleet in human history. There were military ships and civilian vessels, experimental craft and ancient fighters, weapons that were approved by Earth Command, and others that were definitely not legal. Admiral Morrison stood in the observation deck, Watching the ships arrive, Ambassador Kalara stood beside him, her eyes wide with wonder. "We asked for help," she said quietly. "We expected maybe a few ships, a small fleet. Instead, you have brought us an armada." Morrison smiled. "Lady, you haven't seen anything yet. These are just the ones who got here first. More are coming every day." As if to prove his point, another ship appeared in the distance. This one was different from all the others. It was sleek and fast, with weapons that seemed to bend light around them. "Who is that?" Kalara asked. Morrison checked his computer. "Captain Rick Harrison. They call him Boom because his ship is basically a flying bomb. He's probably the craziest person in human space." "And you're letting him join your fleet?" Morrison's smile got bigger. "Ma'am, crazy is exactly what we need right now. The Void. Hunters think they know how to fight. They've beaten every civilized race in the galaxy, but they've never fought humans. And they've definitely never fought human legends." As the fleet continued to grow, word began to spread throughout human space. This wasn't just a military operation. This was something bigger. This was humanity showing the galaxy who they really were. Children watched the news broadcasts with wide eyes. Parents told stories of the legendary captains. Old soldiers dusted off their uniforms and wished they could join the fight. The message was clear. When the galaxy needed heroes, humanity had sent legends. And those legends were ready to show the universe what humans could do when they stopped holding back. The Void Hunters had no idea what was coming for them. The weapon should not have existed. According to every known law of physics, it was impossible. But Captain Billy Thompson didn't care much about the laws of physics. That Billy stood on the bridge of his ship, the USS Ragnarok, watching his chief engineer work on their latest creation. Dr. Karen Walsh was covered in grease and looked like she hadn't slept in days. She was muttering to herself as she adjusted something deep inside the weapon's core. "Karen, please tell me this thing won't blow up my ship," Billy said. Karen looked up at him with wild eyes. "I can't tell you that, Captain, because I honestly don't know." The gravity cannon was Billy's idea. He had been thinking about the Void Hunters and their ability to phase between dimensions. Normal weapons couldn't hit them when they shifted. But what if you could create a weapon that affected space itself? "The theory is simple," Karen explained to the other engineers who had gathered around. "We create a small black hole and fire it at the enemy. The black hole pulls everything toward it, including ships that are trying to phase out of normal space." "And the bad part?" asked Lieutenant Cooper. "Well, black holes are kind of hard to control. There's a chance it could grow and eat our own ship, or the planet we're trying to protect, or maybe the entire solar system." Billy laughed. "That's what makes it interesting." Across the docking bay, Captain Rick Harrison was having his own problems. His ship, the Fireworks, was essentially a flying weapons factory. Rick and his team had spent years developing explosives that other people thought were too dangerous to use. "Show me the new ones," Rick said to his weapons officer, Sergeant Kate Murphy. Kate led him to a secure storage room. Inside were rows of devices that looked innocent enough, but each one could level a city block. "These are the antimatter cluster bombs," Kate explained. "Each one splits into 100 smaller bombs, and each of those splits into 100 more. By the time they're done splitting, you have 1,000,000 tiny antimatter explosions happening at the same time." "Nice. What about the plasma torpedoes?" "We steal plasma directly from stars and compress it into torpedo form. When it hits something, it's like getting hit by a piece of the sun." Rick nodded approvingly. "And the time reversal bombs?" Kate grinned. "Those are my favorite. The bomb creates a small field where time flows backward. The enemy ship experiences its own explosion before we even fire the weapon. It's very confusing for them." On the research vessel Curiosity, Dr. Alan Murphy was working on something even stranger. His team had been studying alien technology for years, trying to understand how other species built their weapons. Then they had started combining alien tech with human creativity. The problem with most weapons, Alan explained to his assistant, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, is that they work within the normal rules of reality. But what if we could make a weapon that changes the rules? The device they were building looked like a crystal sphere surrounded by spinning metal rings. Inside the sphere, energy patterns danced in colors that shouldn't exist. It attacks the quantum structure of space itself, Jennifer said, reading from her notes. When it hits an enemy ship, it makes the ship forget how to exist in normal reality. That's putting it simply, but yes, Alan agreed. The ship doesn't get destroyed. It just stops being real. But the most mysterious arrival was the dreadnought Eternity. Captain Helen Rodriguez had brought her ship back from the edge of known space, and nobody knew what weapons it carried now. Helen walked through her ship's weapon bays, checking systems that hadn't existed when she left Earth 20 years ago. Her crew had built things in the darkness between stars, using technology they had found in places that weren't supposed to exist. Captain, the dark matter cannons are ready, reported her weapons officer, Lieutenant Tom Davis. What about the reality anchors? Charged and ready. If we fire those, anything in the target area will be forced to exist in normal space-time. No phasing, no dimensional tricks. Helen nodded. Good. What about the forbidden weapons? Tom looked nervous. Ma'am, those were banned by the Geneva Accords of 2387. Using them would be considered a war crime. Tom, we're fighting things that eat entire planets. I think we can worry about war crimes later. As the various captains worked on their impossible weapons, Admiral Morrison called a meeting of all the ship commanders. The main briefing room at Luna Station was packed with legendary figures, each one famous for doing things that shouldn't be possible. Ambassador Kalara stood at the front of the room, still amazed by what she was seeing. These humans weren't just building weapons. They were building impossibilities. I need to understand, she said to the assembled captains. Other species develop weapons based on scientific principles. You test them carefully. You make sure they're safe. You follow established procedures. But you humans seem to be building weapons based on curiosity and stubbornness. Danny Collins, the old fighter pilot, chuckled. Ma'am, the difference is simple. Other species build weapons to win wars efficiently. We build weapons to win wars that can't be won. Captain Amy Patterson, whose ship was currently invisible, added, We don't ask if something is possible. We ask if it's necessary. If it's necessary, we find a way to make it possible. General Pete Carter nodded from where he sat. His mobile fortress carried enough firepower to destroy a moon. The way I see it, the Void Hunters have been winning because they fight predictable enemies. Every civilized species follows the same basic rules of warfare. But humans aren't really civilized, are we? The room laughed at that. It was true, and they all knew it. Admiral Susan Lewis stood up. The Void Hunters use their ability to phase between dimensions as their main advantage. They attack, then disappear before their enemies can fight back. But what happens when they face an enemy that attacks dimensions themselves? Dr. Alan Murphy held up his strange crystal weapon. We're about to find out. This weapon doesn't just affect normal space. It affects the spaces between spaces. When we fire this at a Void Hunter ship, it won't matter what dimension they're hiding in. Captain Rick Harrison grinned. My time reversal bombs work across dimensions, too. The enemy gets blown up in all possible realities at the same time. Ambassador Kalara looked around the room in wonder. You're talking about weapons that shouldn't exist, tactics that make no sense, and strategies that ignore every rule of warfare. How do you even coordinate something like this? Morrison answered her. We don't coordinate in the traditional sense. Each captain knows their job and their ship. When the fighting starts, we adapt. We improvise. We do whatever works. But that sounds like chaos, Kalara protested. Exactly, said Captain Helen Rodriguez. Chaos is something the Void Hunters have never had to deal with. They've fought organized fleets and logical tactics for 1,000 years. They have no idea how to handle pure human creativity. As the meeting continued, the captains shared their plans. Each ship would operate independently, but as part of a larger strategy. They would attack the Void Hunters from directions that didn't make sense, using weapons that broke the rules of physics. Captain Billy Thompson explained his gravity cannon. I'll create black holes right in the middle of their formations. They won't be able to phase away because the black holes will pull them back into normal space. Captain Rick Harrison described his explosive strategy. I'll hit them with weapons that explode in the past, present, and future, all at the same time. They won't know when they're getting blown up. Dr. Alan Murphy showed his reality warping device. I'll make their ships forget how to exist. It's hard to fight when you're not sure if you're real or not. As the meeting ended, Admiral Morrison looked around at the assembled legends. Each one was crazy in their own way. Each one had built weapons that shouldn't work. Each one was ready to fight a war that couldn't be won. Ladies and gentlemen, Morrison said, we're about to show the galaxy something new. We're going to show them what happens when humans stop playing by the rules. Ambassador Kalara watched the captains file out of the room. Each one was heading back to their ship to prepare weapons that defied understanding. She was beginning to realize that asking humans for help might have been the best decision her people had ever made. The Void Hunters had conquered 17 star systems by being stronger, faster, and more advanced than their enemies. But they had never fought an enemy that was completely insane. They were about to learn the difference. Ambassador Kalara stood in the observation deck of Luna Station, watching the human fleet prepare for departure. She was trying to understand what she was seeing, but it made no sense according to everything she knew about warfare. The Zephyrian military, like most advanced civilizations, followed strict rules. Ships moved in precise formations. Commands flowed down a clear chain of authority. Weapons were tested and approved by committees. Everything was logical, organized, and efficient. The human fleet was chaos. Ships were scattered across space in what looked like random patterns. Some were flying in circles. Others were moving backward. Captain Amy Patterson's ship kept disappearing and reappearing in different locations, making it impossible to track. I don't understand, Kalara said to Admiral Morrison, who was standing beside her. How do you coordinate an attack when your ships are moving like this? Morrison smiled. We don't coordinate in the way you're thinking. Each captain knows their job and trusts the others to do theirs. When the fighting starts, we adapt to whatever happens. But that's so inefficient, Kalara protested. Your ships are wasting fuel. Your formations make no tactical sense, and some of your captains are completely ignoring orders. Exactly, Morrison said. Efficiency is predictable. The Void Hunters have fought efficient enemies for 1,000 years. They know how to counter organized attacks and logical strategies, but they've never fought pure chaos. As if to prove his point, Captain Rick Harrison's ship suddenly accelerated toward a group of other vessels, then veered away at the last second while firing his weapons into empty space. What is he doing? Kalara asked, alarmed. Testing his time reversal bombs, Morrison explained calmly. He's shooting at where the enemy will be, not where they are now. It only works if you do it when it doesn't make sense. On the bridge of the Curiosity, Dr. Alan Murphy was explaining human tactics to his confused alien observer. The Zephyrian scientist, Dr. Vexen, had come aboard to learn about human technology. but he was having trouble understanding the logic. Your weapon systems violate basic principles of physics, Vexen said, looking at the reality warping device. They shouldn't work at all. They work because we believe they work, Alan explained. Human technology isn't just based on science. It's based on stubbornness. If we need something to work badly enough, we find a way to make it work. That doesn't make sense, Vexen insisted. Of course it doesn't make sense, said Dr. Jennifer. Walsh, that's what makes it effective. The Void Hunters expect their enemies to make sense. When we do something that defies logic, they don't know how to respond. Alan activated a display showing the fleet's movement patterns. To Vexen, it looked like complete disorder. Ships were moving in seemingly random directions, with no apparent coordination. But look closer, Alan said. There is a pattern, but it's not mathematical. It's intuitive. Each captain is doing what feels right, and somehow it all works together. Meanwhile, Captain Danny Collins was having his own conversation with a Zephyrian military observer. The young alien officer, Lieutenant Zara, was trying to understand human fighter tactics. Your flying makes no sense, Zara said, as Danny's fighter performed a maneuver that should have been impossible. You're not following any known aerial combat principles. Danny laughed. Kid, I learned to fly by doing things that weren't supposed to work. The trick is to stop thinking about what's possible and start thinking about what's necessary. But your ship just moved in 6 different directions at the same time, Zara protested. Yeah, that's a new modification. Don't ask me how it works. I just know it does. On the Dreadnought Eternity, Captain Helen Rodriguez was preparing her crew for what was coming. Her weapons officer, Lieutenant Tom Davis, was still nervous about some of their more exotic armaments. Captain, I have to ask again, are we really going to use the reality bombs? Tom said. If we have to, Helen replied. Tom, I've seen what the Void Hunters can do. I've fought them in the spaces between dimensions. Normal weapons don't work. Against them, we need to be ready to use everything we have. But the reality bombs could damage the fabric of space itself, Tom warned. And the Void Hunters could eat the entire galaxy if we don't stop them. Which risk would you rather take? As the fleet prepared to depart, Admiral Morrison called a final meeting with all the ship captains. This time, the meeting was held via video link because trying to get all the legendary captains in one room had proven impossible. Half of them were too paranoid to leave their ships, and the other half were too busy making last-minute modifications to their weapons. Listen up, people, Morrison said, his image appearing on screens throughout the fleet. We're about to do something that no human fleet has ever done before. We're going to fight a war in space against an enemy that can phase between dimensions. Captain Billy Thompson's voice came through the comm system. Admiral, my gravity cannon is ready. I can create black holes on demand now. My antimatter cluster bombs are loaded and waiting, added Captain Rick Harrison. I've got enough explosives to blow up a small moon. Admiral Susan Lewis reported from her flagship. The 7th Battle Group is ready. We've practiced our new tactics, and we're confident they'll work. Define confident, Morrison said with a slight smile. Well, they won't kill us, probably. Doctor. Alan Murphy's voice joined the conversation. My reality warping weapons are charged and ready. I still don't fully understand how they work, but the test results are promising. What kind of test results? Morrison asked. The test targets stopped existing. I call that promising. Ambassador Kalara listened to the conversation with growing amazement. These humans were discussing weapons that violated the laws of physics, tactics that made no logical sense, and strategies that seemed designed to create maximum chaos. Admiral Morrison, she said, I need to ask you something. Are you absolutely certain this will work? The comm channel was quiet for a moment. Then Morrison answered, Ma'am, I'm not certain of anything. We're about to fight an enemy that's never been defeated, using weapons that shouldn't exist, with tactics that don't make sense. But I'll tell you what I am certain of. If anyone can find a way to win an impossible war, it's humans. Captain. Danny Collins' voice crackled through the comm. The way I see it, we've got two choices. We can fight smart and lose like everyone else, or we can fight crazy and maybe win. I vote for crazy, said Captain Amy Patterson. Crazy it is, agreed General Pete Carter. As the conversation continued, Kalara began to understand something important about humans. They weren't just building impossible weapons or using chaotic tactics. They were approaching the entire concept of warfare differently than any other species in the galaxy. Other races fought to minimize losses and maximize strategic advantage. They used proven tactics and reliable technology. They fought wars to win quickly and efficiently. Humans fought wars to survive. And when survival was at stake, they were willing to try anything, no matter how crazy it seemed. One last thing, Morrison said as the meeting ended. When we get to Zephyrian space, we're going to be facing an enemy that's been winning for 1,000 years. They think they know everything about warfare. Let's show them they're wrong. Captain Helen Rodriguez spoke from the eternity. Admiral, I've seen what's out there in the dark. The Void Hunters aren't just another enemy. They're something else. Entirely. But so are we. They've never fought humans before. They have no idea what they're getting into. As the communication ended, the human fleet began to move. But they didn't move like a normal fleet. Instead of forming neat columns or precise formations, they spread out across space like a school of fish that had suddenly decided to become a weapon. Ambassador Kalara watched them go, still trying to understand what she was seeing. The humans had answered her people's call for help, but not in the way she had expected. They hadn't sent a traditional military force with logical tactics and proven weapons. They had sent legends. And those legends were about to teach the galaxy a new way to fight wars. The Void Hunters had conquered 17 star systems by being stronger, faster, and more technologically advanced than their enemies. They had perfected the art of warfare against civilized opponents, but they had never fought an uncivilized enemy. They had never faced an opponent that was willing to break every rule, ignore every law of physics, and do whatever it took to win. They were about to learn the difference between fighting a war and fighting for survival. Humanity was very, very good at surviving. The journey to Zephyrian space took the human fleet through regions that most civilizations avoided. These were the hunting grounds of the Void Hunters, areas where space itself had been twisted and changed by their feeding. Captain Gary Lee piloted his ship, the Shadow, through the twisted space ahead of the main fleet. Gary was known as Phantom because his ship could phase in and out of normal reality, making him perfect for scouting missions in dangerous territory. What Gary found in the corrupted systems made his blood run cold. Admiral Morrison, this is Phantom reporting, Gary said into his radio, his voice tight with tension. You need to see this. The main fleet was still 3 days behind Gary's position, but his ship's advanced sensors could transmit data across the vast distances. The images that appeared on Morrison's screen showed a nightmare made real. The Kepler system, which had once been home to 6 planets and a thriving civilization, was now something else entirely. The planets were still there, but they had been stripped of everything that made them worlds. No atmosphere, no oceans, no life. Just barren rock orbiting a dying star. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the ship's Void Hunter vessels filled the system like a plague of metal insects. Their ships were wrong in a way that hurt to look at. They existed in multiple dimensions at once, their hulls shifting between solid matter and pure energy. Some of the ships were as large as moons, feeding on the energy of the star itself. "My God," Morrison whispered as he studied the images. "How many of them are there?" "I count at least 3,000 ships in this system alone," Gary reported. "And Admiral, they're not just sitting there. They're building something. Something big." The images showed a massive structure being constructed in the center of the system. It looked like a web made of dark energy, stretching between the dead planets. At its center was a device that pulsed with malevolent light. Ambassador Kilara, who was watching from the bridge of Morrison's flagship, gasped when she saw the structure. "That's a harvester," she whispered. "They're building a harvester." "What does it do?" Morrison asked. "It eats stars," Kilara replied, her voice filled with horror. "When it's complete, it will drain the energy from this system's sun and use it to power their fleet. Then they'll move on to the next system, and the next, until the entire galaxy is dark." Gary's voice came through the com again. "Admiral, I'm detecting movement. A patrol group is heading this way. 12 ships, moving fast." Morrison made a quick decision. "Phantom, fall back to the fleet. We'll meet them together." "Negative, Admiral. They're too fast. They'll catch me before I can reach you. I'm going to try something." On his ship, Gary looked at the approaching Void Hunter patrol. Their ships were sleek and deadly, moving through space like sharks through water. But Gary had advantages they didn't know about. His ship, the Shadow, had been modified with technology that Gary barely understood himself. During a previous mission, he had encountered an ancient alien artifact that had merged with his ship's systems. The result was a vessel that existed partially outside normal spacetime. "Computer, engage ghost mode," Gary said. The Shadow began to fade from normal reality. To outside observers, it would appear to flicker like a dying light bulb. But Gary could still see everything around him perfectly. The Void Hunter patrol arrived. At his position, their sensors scanning for the human ship. Gary watched them search, noting their movement patterns and weapon configurations. These ships were different from anything the Zephyrians had described. They were newer, more advanced, and much more dangerous. One of the Void Hunter ships stopped directly in front of Gary's position. Its hull shimmered as it shifted between dimensions, trying to detect the hidden human vessel. For a moment, Gary thought he had been discovered. Then the ship moved on, continuing its patrol. Gary waited until the Void Hunters were gone before reactivating his radio. "Admiral, this is Phantom. I've got bad news and worse news." "Give me the bad news first," Morrison replied. "The Void Hunters have upgraded their technology. These ships are faster and more powerful than anything the Zephyrians faced. They can phase between dimensions almost instantly, and their weapons work across multiple realities." "And the worst news? They're not just building one harvester. I counted at least 6 more systems with similar structures. They're planning to drain the energy from multiple stars at the same time." Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "How long do we have?" "Based on the construction rate, maybe a week, before the first harvester is operational. After that, they'll be unstoppable." The news spread through the human fleet quickly. What they were facing was worse than anyone had imagined. The Void Hunters weren't just trying to conquer the galaxy. They were trying to consume it entirely. On the bridge of the Curiosity, Dr. Alan Murphy was analyzing the data from Gary's scouting mission. His assistant, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, looked pale as she studied the enemy ship configurations. "Alan, I don't think our weapons will work against these ships," Jennifer said. "They're too advanced, too well protected." Alan smiled grimly. "Jennifer, that's exactly what makes this interesting. Everyone else who fought the Void Hunters tried to match their technology. We're going to do something different." "What's that?" "We're going to cheat." Meanwhile, Captain Rick Harrison was having a similar conversation with his weapons officer Sergeant Kate Murphy. They were studying the images of the Void Hunter ships, trying to figure out how to blow them up. Captain, their dimensional shielding is incredible, Kate said. Our normal explosives won't be able to penetrate it. Who said anything about normal explosives? Rick replied, Kate, remember what I always tell you. If it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing? Exactly. These ships exist in multiple dimensions? Fine. We'll blow them up in multiple dimensions. On the Dreadnought Eternity, Captain Helen Rodriguez was preparing her crew for what was coming. Her ship had been modified with weapons and technology that didn't exist in any human database. During her 20 years in the dark spaces between stars, she had learned things that changed her understanding of warfare. Tom, how are the reality anchors? Helen asked her weapons officer. Charged and ready, Captain. When we fire these, the enemy ships will be forced to exist in normal spacetime. No more dimensional tricks. Good. What about the dark matter cannons? Those are a little more complicated. We're essentially firing concentrated darkness at the enemy. It should disrupt their energy-based systems. Helen nodded. And the Forbidden's weapons? Tom looked uncomfortable. Captain, I have to ask one more. Time, are we really going to use weapons that were banned by the Geneva Accords? Helen turned to look at him with eyes that had seen too much. Tom, I've been fighting things like this for 20 years. I've seen what happens when you hold back, when you try to fight fair against an enemy that doesn't. The Void Hunters don't care about our laws or our morals. They care about feeding. If we're going to stop them, we need to be willing to use everything we have. As the human fleet continued toward the battle zone, the various captains began to coordinate their attack plans. But their coordination was unlike anything seen in conventional warfare. Captain Danny Collins, flying his modified fighter, was practicing maneuvers that defied the laws of physics. His ship could now move in directions that didn't exist in normal space, giving him an advantage against enemies who relied on predictable movement patterns. Admiral Susan Lewis and her 7th battle group were rehearsing tactics that looked like organized chaos. Her ships would attack in patterns that seemed random, but were actually carefully orchestrated to create maximum confusion among the enemy. Captain Billy Thompson was testing his gravity cannon, creating small black holes in empty space and watching how they affected the fabric of reality. Each test gave him new ideas for how to use the weapon against the Void Hunters. But perhaps the most important preparation was happening on Captain Amy Patterson's ship, the Phantom. Amy had been working with the other captains to develop a new type of warfare, one that took advantage of humanity's greatest strength. The key, Amy explained during a fleet-wide conference call, is unpredictability. The Void Hunters have fought hundreds of different species, but they've all followed the same basic patterns. They attack in formations. They use logical tactics. They try to minimize losses. And we're going to do the opposite, added Captain Helen Rodriguez. Exactly. We're going to attack from directions that don't make sense, using weapons that shouldn't work, with tactics that change faster than the enemy can adapt. Admiral Morrison listened to his captains plan their impossible attack. Each one was proposing strategies that would be considered insane by any military academy. But they weren't fighting a normal enemy, and normal tactics had already failed. All right, people, Morrison said. We're 3 days out from the battle zone. Final preparations start now. Remember, we're not just fighting for Earth or even for the Zephyrians. We're fighting for the right of life to exist in this galaxy. As the fleet prepared for battle, word of their mission spread throughout human space. Children watched news broadcasts showing the legendary ships heading toward their destiny. Adults told stories of the captains who had answered the call. Old soldiers wished they could join the fight. The message was clear. Humanity was about to face its greatest test. The battle began in the worst possible way. The human fleet dropped out of faster than light, travel at the edge of the Zephyrian home system to find the Void Hunters already there. Hundreds of their ships surrounded the beautiful blue-green world, their dark hulls pulsing with stolen energy. The planet's surface was scarred with energy storms as the invaders drained life from everything they touched. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical display with grim determination. The enemy fleet was larger than expected, over 2,000 ships of various sizes, from small fighters to massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything in the human fleet. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the planet," reported Lieutenant Brown. "It's Ambassador Kalara." Kalara's image appeared on the main screen. Her skin was dim, almost gray, and behind her the Zephyrian command center was in chaos. "Admiral Morrison, thank the stars you're here," she said, her voice weak. "The Void Hunters arrived 2 days ago. They're using our population as an energy source. We estimate we have less than 6 hours before the feeding process becomes irreversible." Morrison nodded grimly. "We're here, Ambassador. But I won't lie to you. This is going to be the fight of our lives." The Void Hunter fleet began to move as soon as they detected the human ships. Their vessels flowed through space like liquid darkness, their hulls shifting between dimensions as they approached. It was a sight that had terrified dozens of species across the galaxy. But the human fleet didn't retreat. Instead, they did something that the Void Hunters had never seen before. They scattered. Captain Danny Collins led the first wave, his modified fighter diving straight toward the center of the enemy formation. Behind him came a dozen other fighters, each one flying in a different pattern that made no tactical sense. "This is Reaper 1, Danny called over the radio. "Time to show these things how humans dance." His fighter began to move in ways that violated physics. It turned in 6 directions at once, accelerated backward while shooting forward, and phased through solid matter like it was made of light. The Void Hunter ships tried to target him, but their weapons couldn't lock on to something that refused to obey the laws of reality. Danny's fighter reached the enemy formation and immediately began causing chaos. His weapons fired in all directions, hitting targets that shouldn't have been possible to hit. Other Void Hunter ships tried to phase away from the attack, only to find themselves flying into the paths of other human fighters. "What are they doing?" one of the Zephyrian observers asked from the planet's surface. "They're fighting like humans," Kalara whispered in amazement. The main battle began when Captain Billy Thompson fired his gravity cannon. The weapon created a black hole right in the center of the Void Hunter formation, and suddenly physics became everyone's enemy. The black hole pulled everything toward it: Void Hunter ships, cosmic dust, even light itself. Ships that tried to phase into other dimensions found themselves pulled back into normal space by the incredible gravitational force. "This is Ragnarok." Billy's voice came over the fleet communication system. "Gravity cannon working perfectly. The enemy can't phase away from something that affects all dimensions at once." Captain Rick Harrison chose that moment to deploy his most insane weapons. The fireworks launched a spread of time reversal bombs toward the trapped Void Hunter ships. Bombs didn't explode when they hit their targets. Instead, they created small fields where time flowed backward. The Void Hunter ships suddenly experienced their own destruction before Rick had even fired the weapons that would destroy them. The effect was devastating. Enemy ships began exploding randomly throughout their formation as they experienced future damage in the present timeline. Their commanders couldn't understand what was happening. How could their ships be destroyed by weapons that hadn't been fired yet? "This is fireworks," Rick reported with obvious satisfaction. "Time bombs are working great. The enemy is getting blown up by explosions that won't happen for another 5 minutes." But the Void Hunters weren't helpless. They had been conquering star systems for 1,000 years, and they quickly began to adapt to the human tactics. The largest Void Hunter ship, a massive dreadnought the size of a small moon, began to pulse with dark energy. Reality around it started to twist and bend as it projected a field that dampened the human weapons. "This is getting interesting," observed Dr. Alan Murphy from the bridge of the Curiosity. "They're trying to stabilize local space-time to neutralize our dimensional weapons. Can they do that?" asked Dr. Jennifer Walsh. "Probably," Alan replied. "But they've never dealt with a reality-warping weapon before." Alan activated his most experimental device, the crystal sphere surrounded by spinning. Metal rings began to glow with colors that didn't have names. When he fired it at the Void Hunter dreadnought, something amazing happened. The enemy ship began to forget how to exist. Parts of its hull flickered between solid and transparent. Its weapons fired at targets that weren't there. Its engines pushed it in directions that didn't exist in normal space. "Direct hit," Alan reported. "The enemy flagship is having an existential crisis." The battle became even more chaotic when Captain Amy Patterson's ship, the Phantom, began attacking from inside the enemy formation. Her vessel could phase between dimensions at will, allowing her to appear inside Void Hunter ships and fire from within their own hulls. "This is Ghost," Amy's voice crackled over the radio. "I'm fighting them from inside their own ships. It's very confusing for them." Admiral Susan Lewis and her 7th Battle Group chose that moment to implement their most complex tactical maneuver. Her ships began moving in patterns that looked random, but were actually carefully coordinated to create maximum chaos among the enemy. The Tempest and her escort vessels wove between the Void Hunter ships like dancers, never staying in one place long enough to be targeted effectively. Their weapons fired in coordinated patterns that created walls of energy, forcing the enemy ships into positions where they could be attacked by other human vessels. 7th Battle Group engaging, Susan reported. "We're using the Macarena formation." "What?" Morrison asked. "Don't ask, Admiral. Just trust me, it works." General Pete Carter's mobile fortress, the Bulwark, arrived at the battle like a flying mountain. His ship was too big to dodge enemy fire, so instead it simply absorbed everything the Void Hunters could throw at it, while returning fire with enough weapons to level a continent. "Ironwall," Pete's calm voice came over the radio. "I'm going to park myself right in the middle of their formation and see how much punishment they can take." The Bulwark began firing with every weapon it carried. Energy beams, missile salvos, and exotic weapons that Pete had collected over the years. All fired at once. The sheer volume of firepower was enough to overwhelm the Void Hunters. Dimensional shielding through brute force. But the most terrifying addition to the battle was the arrival of the dreadnought Eternity. Captain Helen Rodriguez brought her. Ship out of the dark spaces between dimensions, like a nightmare made real. The Eternity looked like it had been through hell and come back for more. Its hull was covered in scars from battles that shouldn't have been possible. Its weapons were things that existed in the spaces between spaces, firing darkness itself at the enemy. "This is eternal." Helen's voice was cold as space itself. "Time to show these things what I learned in the void." The Eternity fired its reality anchors at the Void Hunter fleet. Suddenly, enemy ships that had been phasing between dimensions found themselves locked in normal space-time, unable to use their greatest advantage. Then Helen activated her most forbidden weapon, the dark matter. Cannons fired streams of concentrated nothingness at the enemy ships. Where the beams hit, matter simply ceased to exist. Void Hunter vessels found holes appearing in their hulls, not damage from explosions or energy weapons, but simply empty space where their ships used to be. Forbidden's weapons deployed. Helen reported without emotion. "The enemy is learning what it means to fight something that doesn't play by the rules." The battle raged across the entire star system. Human ships darted between enemy vessels like angry wasps, their weapons creating effects that the Void Hunters had never encountered. Black holes appeared and disappeared randomly. Time flowed backward in some areas, while accelerating in others. Reality itself became a weapon as the humans used physics like a club, but the Void Hunters were adapting. Their ships began working together to create stable zones where human weapons couldn't function properly. They started targeting the human. Ships with focused attacks designed to overwhelm their defenses. Several human vessels took heavy damage. Captain Collins' fighter was hit by an energy beam that partially shifted him into another dimension. Captain Harrison's ship was struck by a weapon that made his explosive ammunition detonate inside his own hull. "We're taking casualties," Morrison reported to the fleet. "All ships implement Protocol Crazy Even." Protocol Crazy Even was humanity's ultimate tactical doctrine, organized chaos elevated to an art form. Every human ship began doing something completely unexpected and apparently random. Some ships flew directly at enemy vessels, only to phase through them at the last second. Others fired their weapons in seemingly random directions, only to have the shots curve through space-time to hit targets from impossible angles. The end came suddenly, in a way that nobody expected. The battle had been raging for 6 hours. The space around the Zephyrian homeworld was filled with the wreckage of both human and Void Hunter ships. Energy storms from damaged weapons created aurora effects across the planet's atmosphere. Reality itself had been twisted into knots by the impossible weapons both sides were using. Captain Danny Collins was barely conscious in his damaged fighter. His ship had been hit so many times that parts of it existed in 3 different dimensions simultaneously. But he was still flying, still fighting, still refusing to give up. "This is Reaper 1, he called over the radio, his voice weak but determined. "I'm down to emergency power, and my weapons are firing in the wrong century, but I'm still here." Around him, the other human ships were in similar condition. Captain Rick Harrison's vessel was held together mostly by determination and creative. Cursing, Captain Amy Patterson's ship kept flickering between visible and invisible as its dimensional systems malfunctioned. General Pete Carter's fortress looked like a flying scrap heap, but its weapons were still firing. The Void Hunter fleet was also badly damaged, but they still outnumbered the humans 3-1. Their massive dreadnought was wounded, but not destroyed, and it was gathering energy for a final attack that would wipe out the remaining human ships. That's when Dr. Alan Murphy made a discovery that changed everything. "Admiral Morrison, this is Curiosity." Alan's excited voice came over the communication system. "I've been analyzing the Void Hunter ship signatures, and I think I know how to stop them permanently." "Talk to me, Prophet," Morrison replied from his damaged flagship. "They're not really ships in the traditional sense," Alan explained rapidly. "They're feeding mechanisms. Each ship is connected to a central consciousness that directs their actions. If we can disrupt that connection, the entire fleet will become helpless." "How do we do that?" Morrison asked. "We need to hit their command ship with everything we have at the same time. Not just our weapons, our reality warping effects, our dimensional distortions, all of it together. It should create a feedback loop that destroys their central nervous system." Morrison looked around at his battered fleet. They had maybe one good attack left in them. If this didn't work, they would all die, and the Void Hunters would continue their campaign across the galaxy. "All ships, this is Admiral Morrison," he said into his radio. "We're going to make one final attack. Target the enemy dreadnought with everything you have. This is our last chance to save not just the Zephyrians, but everyone." The response came from across the fleet, voices filled with determination despite their exhaustion. "This is Reaper 1. My fighter's falling apart, but my weapons still work. I'm with you. Fireworks here." I've got one time bomb left, and it's a big one. Let's make it count. Ghost reporting. My ship's mostly in another dimension right now, but I can still fight. Iron wall ready. My fortress might not survive this, but we're going to make it spectacular. Stormbringer standing by. The 7th battle group is ready for one last dance. Eternal. Here, I've been saving my worst weapon for this moment. Time to see if 20 years in hell taught me anything useful. Captain Helen Rodriguez looked at her weapons officer, Lieutenant Tom Davis. Tom, arm the reality bombs. All of them. Captain, if we fire those at the same time as everyone else's weapons, the combined effect could tear a hole in space-time itself. Tom warned. Helen smiled grimly. Good. Maybe that will finally kill these things. Dr. Alan Murphy charged his reality warping weapon to maximum power. The crystal sphere was glowing so brightly it hurt to look at, and the metal rings around it were spinning fast enough to blur. Jennifer, if this doesn't work, it's been an honor serving with you, he said to his assistant. Same here, Alan, but I think it's going to work. It has to work. Captain Billy Thompson prepared his gravity cannon for one final shot. The weapon was damaged and unstable, but it could still create black holes on demand. Computer, prepare gravity. Cannon for maximum yield, he ordered. Warning, the computer replied. Firing at maximum yield has a 78% chance of destroying this ship. I'll take those odds, Billy said. The human fleet began to move toward the Void Hunter dreadnought. Their ships were barely functional, their weapons were failing, and most of their crews were injured. But they flew toward their target with the determination of people who had nothing left to lose. The Void Hunter dreadnought detected the incoming attack and began charging its own ultimate weapon. Dark energy gathered around the massive ship as it prepared to unleash a blast that would destroy every human vessel at once. It would be a race to see who could fire first. All ships, on my mark, Admiral Morrison commanded. 3.2. 1. Fire. The combined attack from the human fleet was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Captain Billy Thompson's gravity cannon created a massive black hole right next to the enemy dreadnought. Captain Rick Harrison's final time. Bomb created a temporal distortion that made the target experience the attack in multiple timelines simultaneously. Doctor. Alan Murphy's reality warping weapon hit the enemy ship and began making it forget how to exist. Captain Amy Patterson fired from inside another dimension, her weapons appearing inside the enemy hull without crossing the space between. Admiral Susan Lewis and her battle group created a coordinated energy pattern that focused all their firepower into a single devastating beam. General Pete Carter's fortress fired every weapon it had, turning space around the target into a storm of energy and destruction. But the most terrifying contribution came from Captain Helen Rodriguez and the dreadnought. Eternity. Helen fired all of her reality bombs at once. The weapons hit the Void Hunter dreadnought and began tearing holes in the fabric of spacetime itself. Reality around the enemy ship started to collapse as multiple dimensions tried to exist in the same place at the same time. The effect was incredible and terrible. The Void Hunter dreadnought began to implode as its connection to the other ships in the fleet was severed. Without their central coordination, the individual Void Hunter vessels became confused and directionless. But the combined human attack had consequences nobody expected. The reality bombs, combined with all the other dimensional weapons, created a cascade effect that spread throughout the star system. Space-time itself began to unravel as too many impossible weapons fired at the same target. Admiral, we have a problem, Dr. Alan Murphy reported, his voice filled with alarm. The dimensional distortions are spreading. We've created a space-time anomaly that's growing out of control. Morrison watched his tactical display as the anomaly expanded. If it continued to grow, it would consume the entire star system, destroying the Zephyrian homeworld along with both fleets. All ships, emergency retreat, Morrison ordered. Get as far away as possible. But Captain Helen Rodriguez had a different idea. Negative, Admiral, she said calmly. The Eternity is going to stay and contain the anomaly. Captain, that's suicide, Morrison protested. Maybe, but I've been fighting things like this for 20 years. I know how to handle dimensional anomalies. My ship can absorb the distortion and channel it into the void between spaces. Helen turned to her crew. All hands, abandon ship. This is going to get rough. Captain, we're staying with you, Lieutenant Tom Davis said firmly. We followed you through hell itself. We're not leaving now. The rest of the crew agreed. They had served on the Eternity for 20 years, fighting impossible battles in the dark spaces between stars. They weren't going to abandon their captain now. Helen smiled sadly. All right then. Tom, prepare the void engines. We're going to drag this anomaly into the space between dimensions. The Eternity flew directly into the expanding distortion. The ship's hull began to glow as it absorbed the chaotic energy of collapsing spacetime. Helen's crew worked frantically to channel the power into their experimental void engines. Void engines at maximum power, Tom reported. We're creating a dimensional tunnel. Good. Now we just have to survive long enough to complete the process. The ship shook violently as it absorbed more and more of the anomaly's energy. Parts of the hull began to phase in and out of existence. The crew worked at their stations, even as reality warped around them. Dimensional tunnel stable, Tom announced. We can start the transfer. Helen activated the void engines. The space-time anomaly began to collapse inward, drawn into the tunnel the Eternity had created. The distorted energy flowed into the dark spaces between dimensions, where it could do no harm to the normal universe. As the anomaly disappeared, the Eternity began to fade from normal spacetime. The ship and its crew were being pulled into the void along with the energy they had contained. Admiral Morrison, this is Captain Rodriguez. Helen's voice came over the radio, growing fainter. The anomaly is contained. The system is safe. Helen, get out of there, Morrison pleaded. Can't do that, Admiral. Someone has to make sure this energy stays in the void where it belongs. Consider it our final service to humanity. The Eternity disappeared from sensors, taking the dangerous anomaly with it. The space around the Zephyrian homeworld returned to normal, and the stars shone clearly once again. With their command ship destroyed and their coordination severed, the remaining Void Hunter vessels began to retreat. They fled into the dark spaces between stars, their confid